Catch up on what you missed or hear it again. This is the Best of the Regulars on Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5.
Facebook.com/Extra905FM. Hit us up on Twitter, too, at ExtraPTBO. Always one of my favorite guests. Let's welcome into the conversation the Regulars legal analyst, that being Brian Goldfinger.
Goldfinger, he's the man with the Midas touch.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Hello, Mr. Goldfinger.
Hello, George.
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing very good. What did you make about the news about Rogers possibly selling the Blue Jays?
You know, pro sports teams, I think, do much better when there's one crazy owner who's super duper committed to winning and doesn't really care about the bottom line. Look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're in the running year after year, as opposed to a mega conglomerate corporation, which has other vested interests in terms of, are we streaming enough games? Are we selling enough subscriptions? You know, there's kind of a min-max that they look at in terms of winning versus their bottom line. I'd rather they just go with one crazy winner who wants to win as opposed to a mega conglomerate.
I could not agree with you more, and we've seen the most successful owners in sports typically tend to be the George Steinbrenners of the world, right?
Yep.
And just looking at this list, Graham, here, do we have the little, we got a little Let's Make a Deal music that we're going to play here. Let me run down the list of people who might have deep enough pockets to own the Toronto Blue Jays. The Thompson family, Canadian. They're worth $30.74 billion.
That's it, eh?
That's it. How about Galen Weston? Maybe. $11.38 billion. Arthur Irving, James Irving, and John Irving. The Irving brothers, $8.23. Jim Patterson is the fourth richest Canadian, $7.88 billion. Now, you want me to go completely off the grid? This is a name you'd be very familiar with, Brian. I know because I was a Cubs fan, and he inquired about buying the Cubs when the Tribune sold them. Mark Cuban has been looking to get into the baseball landscape.
That'd be great.
Is that not the guy you want running the team?
That's the guy, but I'm going to throw out a Canadian name for you, a guy who I think he was in the running for a hockey team, Jim Balsillie, if you recall him. See, I think he has enough of that competitive fire and desire in Canadiana behind him to, you know, really go for gold.
That's a name that I haven't heard in a long time.
You hang around the Kitchener-Waterloo area. Are you familiar with Jim? Do you know him well? Or?
I don't know him at all. I just know that he wanted a hockey team in Kitchener-Waterloo, and he was ready to drop a lot of money on it, right? So why not drop a lot of money on the Toronto Blue Jays?
How important do you think it would be, and again, we sort of alluded to this earlier, I mean, Rogers, obviously a big corporation, they've got some money in their back pocket, and that's good. But instead, having somebody who understands baseball, understands what it takes to put a winning team on the field, and understands it takes a few bucks to bring those players to Toronto.
Well, absolutely. Again, I think they spent more than maybe what people give them credit for, although it was selective at times. There were dead years where, you know, Rogers didn't have a good year, and it reflected in the ball club. But to your point, Brian, I've been blessed being a Red Wing fan and having Mike Ilitch for all those years. Who basically it's one guy who's a big fan, and then he ends up, you know, spending the money needed to win. I'm a Cubs fan, and you got Tom Ricketts, again, a billionaire who came in, put good pieces around him, and said, I'm going to spend what it takes to win. And, you know, as much as they would tell you that, Rogers, that they were really committed to winning, there's always that little bit of doubt on everyone's mind. You know, what do they actually care about when you're worth $16 billion and you don't even have the highest payroll in Major League Baseball?
I'll play it the other way. Imagine you're a Clipper fan and Donald Sterling all those years is in control of the team.
Yeah.
And so if the risk is always, you know, it can go one way where one owner is crazy about winning. It can go another way where the new owner is just crazy and just wants to have, like, this is a recreational activity for him, you know?
And that happens a lot, too, and they saw that in Montreal when they ended up getting sold,
Or what about Boots Del Baggio?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was that Nashville?
Yeah, Nashville Predators,
yeah, you don't want a single owner who doesn't actually have a lot of money. That's never a good scenario, eh, Graham? What's that, John Spano from the Islanders?
Oh, yeah.
He basically lied his way into owning the team there for a minute.
That's still my favorite story of all time, by the way. I watched a total back wall-to-wall 30 for 30 on that whole situation with John Spano with the Islanders. That the best story of all time, and what a lunatic.
Yeah, the greatest saying from that movie was, he was a real capitalist. He just didn't have any capital. So, that's where he goes. Brian Goldfinger, he's joining us here on the Regulars, Talk Sports Radio Extra 90.5. It is 10:34. Check out Brian's website. It's fantastic. I always go through there. I read some of the blogs that you're able to post. Although you were just telling me before we came to air that there was a new little piece of legislation that came into be yesterday.
Just was announced yesterday by Finance Minister Sousa. More changes to how car insurance works in Ontario. So it seems year after year, month after month, car insurance in Ontario changes. The reason it changes is because your government seems to believe that reducing premiums is all Ontarians want. There's no thought put into job creation, little thought put into hospital, healthcare, education. The most changed legislation, I would argue, in Ontario has been the Insurance Act. And what they're doing to the Insurance Act is essentially they're making you pay more for less benefits. So one of the proposals that they have introduced is a one-size-fit-all operation for treatment with respect to injuries from a car accident. So if you hurt your neck or you hurt your back, they're going to try to implement a one-size-fit-all treatment to get you better. Now, I know everyone who's been involved in an accident. They're different ages, they have different health histories, they have different injuries, but this government seems to believe that a one-size-fit-all approach to tackling those injuries is the way to go. That is completely false and completely wrong. It's going to put more burden on the OHIP system. Another crazy thing that they're doing is that they're going to what are called independent medical assessment centers. I don't know the name. That's a flashback to the 90s. They were called designated assessment centers, where they have neutral medical evaluators evaluate accident victims. How do they get on the list? Well, they got to bid for it, these doctors. And by bidding for it, you know, it's kind of lowest to the bottom, race to the bottom. It didn't work in the 90s. It's not going to work again in 2017. What's even crazier is that they want to put these centers at the hospital. If you've been to your local hospital recently, you will see that there is limited room for patients. There are limited spare rooms. There aren't enough doctors. Putting additional burdens on having car accident victims seen in hospitals for insurance assessments is ludicrous, completely insane. So I don't think there was much thought given to this. I think that the headline is, we want to reduce your rates and we're doing something to tackle, always the key word is fraud. They always use that word fraud. Fraud, fraud, fraud. I've been practicing for around 15 years now. I got to tell you, I don't see very much fraud, and when I do, the police are all over it. They're all over it. So the notion that their fraud is raging and rampant, give me specific examples of fraud and where it ranges, you know, here in Peterborough. I haven't seen it once in Peterborough. I've seen it in Mississauga, Brampton a few times where people stage accidents, but where people stage accidents, the police arrest those guys. They're behind bars. And the notion that it's costing billions and billions of dollars, I believe, is far-fetched, and I believe there are not specific examples put forth in the government's plan indicating that it's fraud. The reality is they just want to make insurance companies more money while you're paying more and getting less.
Other than that, it's a pretty good piece of legislation, isn't it?
Yes. The title is amazing. They always come out with these amazing titles. Fighting Fraud Act, Fair Insurance Act. These titles sound great, but when you actually read and go through the recommendations in the Marshall Report and what they're seeking to implement, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's a carrot in an election year. There you go.
It seems like we're seeing a little bit of that, or at least a lot of people think we're seeing a lot of that.
If I were running, this is what I would do. I would promise everyone free pizza and free beer and lower their taxes. And then once I get in, I say, oh, sorry, guys, I can't deliver. Just the same way Kathleen Wynne did it. She said, well, trying to reduce your premiums by 15% was always a stretch goal. Well, trying to give you free pizza and lowering your taxes and free beer, that was my stretch goal when I'm running in 2018. You know what I mean?
I think that was Brian Goldfinger's official announcement. He's running for mayor of Peterborough.
Yeah.
Graham, it reminds me of that Simpsons episode, right? The garbage man can. You know, Homer just promises whatever he can to get the votes.
That's what you do.
You just always it back to The Simpsons.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sure Bob Ray, he kind of did that a little bit back in the day, too.
The days.
We're chatting with Brian Goldfinger Personal Injury Law here on Talk Sports Radio Extra 90.5. I did want to get a comment on this, and then I want to get your thoughts on the Raptors here coming up in a second. But I read a blog, and you sort of did a question and answer with your blog, and people would write in questions. And I always find that that's where you really get to see some of the issues that are plaguing people. And this was a question that was written down, and I always wondered the answer. And it was quite simply, after you win a case, who ends up paying the award, and does the defendant have to pay? And that's something I've always wondered, because you hear about these, lawsuits in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I don't know too many people who have that money and are able to pay that. What happens in that scenario?
In a typical personal injury case, where it's a car accident or a slip and fall or even a dog bite where there is insurance in place, the insurance company pays. So if a little old lady isn't paying attention to where they are driving and they hit you while you're walking on George Street and they break your legs, it's the little old lady's insurance company that steps into that woman's shoes and they defend the claim on her behalf, and they invariably pay the award. So if the little old lady is ordered to pay $100,000, it's not coming out of the little old lady's pocket. It's coming out of the insurance company's pocket. End of story. The little old lady, her premiums may go up because she ran somebody over, rightfully so, but she is not going to be out of pocket $100,000. You're not putting her in the poorhouse. The same applies for a slip and fall. The same applies for a dog bite.
I see. Okay. Well, that's good to know the little old lady didn't have to pay the $100,000.
Although she will end up paying that in the premiums when they go up, because you run somebody over. I think you'll be paying a few more bucks than
they're not going to go. Honestly, they don't go up by that much, and a lot of these insurance companies have accident forgiveness. So if the little old lady is, honestly, just it's an accident, and accidents do happen. A lot of these insurance companies have accident forgiveness whereby the premiums do not increase, and if they increase by 10%. And your premium, your insurance is $1,000, and it increases by 10%. That's $100.
What about, you said slip and fall? So what about somebody comes out here and they end up falling on this staircase, and then their lawyer says, "Listen, let's sue the mall, but let's also sue the worker who was on duty when that was going on." What happens in that sort of scenario?
The first rule of law school is you sue everybody, right? So you suggesting the notion of suing the worker, that's a great idea. You sue everyone, because sometimes there is coverage, sometimes there is not coverage, or sometimes that worker could be on the hook. Generally, if that worker is on the hook, his or her employer's insurance coverage will take care of it, and the worker will not be paying out of pocket. The notion that a worker will be paying for damages out of pocket in an insurance situation is very far-fetched. Okay, so here we're at Extra today. And if something were to happen to me in this studio right now, and I were to name both of you, Jordan and Graham, personally, I know that Extra is a larger company, My FM Broadcasting.
My
Broadcasting. They have insurance for these sort of things, and their insurance would cover you. You guys would not be on the hook personally. Although you would be named in the lawsuit personally, in terms of paying out any award or settlement, it would not come out of your pocket personally.
It's going to be in your pocket, you and your 6-digit figure over there.
Well, I know. Yeah, I'd be a good target to go after. Brian Goldfinger, Personal Injury Law. Brian, if people are interested in getting more information or contacting you for services, how do they go about doing it?
They can check out the website at goldfingerlaw.com or email me at Brian, BRIAN, at goldfingerlaw.com.
Perfect. Quick comment on the Raptors. They've played particularly well at home. They looked good again last night, and as you said, never really in doubt against Phoenix.
Never in doubt. Good performance. I want to get your guys' take on Jonas Valanciunas. What do you think? He hasn't been playing very much, and when he's been playing, he hasn't been playing very well. What do you think his role is with the team on a go-forward basis?
I mean, I think it gets smaller and smaller, doesn't it? I mean, that's the way it looks. I mean, you almost want to see if there's any takers.
He's almost like Jose Bautista with me for the Blue Jays. Until you mentioned his name, I totally didn't even think about him.
I'm going to throw this out there. The Toronto Raptors are playing the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. The Miami Heat feature 7-footer Hassan Whiteside.
Yes.
We've traded Jonas Valanciunas for maybe a 3 or a 4. are you comfortable rolling out Jakob Poeltl or Bebe Nogueira against Hassan Whiteside?
Well, I had to watch Jakob Poeltl burn my Pacers the other night, so I was pretty impressed with him, actually. But, yeah, to your point, you're kind of picking your poison in that case.
And then I also want to point to Jonas's history against the Boston Celtics. Now, this year, in their first meeting, he didn't have such a good game, but traditionally, he's been a very effective player against the Celtics. So there's a lot of Jonas haters out there, rightfully so. He hasn't been playing very well. I think he has limited confidence. But if they put him in positions where he is going to succeed, I think he's a very good piece in a matchup role. If you remember his role against the Pelicans, they swept the Pelicans because the Pelicans had Boogie Cousins, who's a big boy. He's a big load. So I think in a spot-up role, I think he's a good piece to have. He's still a serviceable player. But playing night in, night out in the starting lineup, say against a smaller lineup, isn't the best fit for him.
Brian Goldfinger, personal injury law and basketball coach extraordinaire. Brian, always appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, guys.
That's our man, Brian Goldfinger.
You are a clever, resourceful man, Mr. Bond. Well, thank you. Perhaps too clever.
Yeah. All right.
This is the best of the regulars on Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5.